Many thanks for staying with us here on Joy News Prime. Let's do some other stories now, but we return to Parliament because the Minority Leader, Haruna Iddrisu, wants the House to accept its share of responsibility for the current economic difficulties facing the country. Haruna Iddrisu says the crisis is due to excessive borrowing by successive governments, particularly this one. Speaking during a core leadership conference organized by the Ministry for Parliamentary Affairs, Haruna Iddrisu argued that Parliament has been lax in its oversight responsibility and has allowed almost all loans without proper scrutiny.
Today, Ghana has an economic crisis, a crisis which is only similar to what pertained in the country in 1983. How did we get there? Excessive borrowing. Who ought to have checked government not to borrow or overborrow? The Parliament of Ghana. So Parliament must accept some blame and some responsibility in not keeping the executive to check. The consequences of excessive borrowing is now being felt by all of us when you hear an animal called a debt exchange initiative. It is affecting businesses, it's affecting public enterprises because they cannot run well, it's affecting the private sector. So Parliament's role as defender of the people's interests is lost. So how did we get there? How come that we couldn't anticipate it? Article 181, it is only Parliament that approves the terms and conditions of a loan. So if we borrowed and now we have exceeded 100% of GDP, how did it happen? And a typical example of the intense partisanship I spoke about, how could a Sino-Hydro loan get approval from Ghana's Parliament? If Ghana's Parliament was to sit right, you have government arguing that Sino-Hydro, I'm doing battle of bauxite, when the road to the bauxite site is not even constructed. The Parliament of Ghana ought, in the defense of the people's interests, ought to have rejected that because the battle has failed. Sino-Hydro is due for payment. You don't have the bauxite. Parliament has reduced itself to a clearinghouse for executive embarrassment. When the executive brings something, then all of us, and I'm not talking about just an if or seven Parliament, when you can talk of CNTI loan, you can talk of STS loan, they bring something to Parliament, we are not ready to scrutinize it and tell them in the face that this is not good enough for the country.
Now, his colleague, Majority Leader Osagyefo Mensah Bonsu, who is also the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, attributed the poor oversight from Parliament to weak committee structures. He proposes that some strong committees in the House should be chaired by the opposition.
The Minority Leader has related to excessive borrowing. And I think he and I have been discussing this. When a country is engaged in deficit financing, the chicken certainly will come home to roost at a point in time. And that's what we are seeing. That is what you're saying. Over the past 20, 25 years, every year, routinely, when we have budgets presented to us, we do know that we have to borrow to survive as a country. And that's what we routinely, that's what we've been doing. And when you know that your resources are not able to match your appropriated amount, what will happen eventually? The edifice will collapse. And I agree with him. I have always been saying on the floor that we want to strengthen Parliament. But the Parliament is as strong as its committees make it. The structure of our committee system in Parliament is not helping us to grow our Parliament. When you have a system where all committees are headed by the members from the ruling party, certainly you have these dividends. You will really lower the standards of Parliament, which is why since 1993, our Parliament has always been rated very lowly when it comes to the performance of our oversight responsibilities. In France, as I keep saying, the Finance Committee, like the Public Accounts Committee, is chaired